Welcome, and thank you for joining today's Market Surveillance Committee meeting. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are currently in a listen-only mode. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of today's call, at which point we will give you all instructions on how you can enter the question queue. With that, I'll now go ahead and turn things over to Dr. Ben Hobbs, Chair of the Market Surveillance Committee. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Silas. You can hear me okay?
Yes, sir. You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, terrific. Well, welcome everybody. In this meeting, we're going to be considering our opinion on storage bid cost recovery and default energy bid enhancements, the draft of which was posted early yesterday. But before that, as usual, I'm going to introduce everybody who's on the phone lines from the ISO and the committee, and we will also have an opportunity for those of you who have any comments or questions on any matter, other than what the agenda is on today, to make a comment. So first of all, joining me are MSC members, Dr. Scott Harvey and Dr. Jim Bushnell. And then from the ISO, we have with us on the speaker line, staff include Shami Davis, Amelia Blank, Sergio Duenas Melendez, Anna McKenna, and Becky Robinson. I don't believe I've missed anybody. So at this point, I would invite anybody who's listening who wants to make a comment or ask a question on any matter other than storage BCR, which we'll be talking at length about later. Go ahead, and if you could queue up on the phone line, we'd like to hear what you what's on your mind. Silas, can you check to see whether anybody would like to say anything?
For our attendees, if you would like to unmute and make a comment or a question, you can press the raise hand icon in your participants panel. You'll need to open the participants panel on the right side of your screen and then click the raise hand icon at the bottom. All right, I'm not seeing any raised hands in the queue at this time. Okay.
All right, so we'll proceed now to a summary of the opinion, in which I'll summarize our major conclusions, and then Scott and Jim will add to those. We'll then open up the phone lines to comments and questions from the audience. There may be modifications we want to make to the opinion or may not be. And then finally, we'll consider its adoption. So first, I'll summarize it. And we've been asked to comment on the ISO's proposal for revising procedures for calculating real-time bid cost recoveries for storage resources. And we focus on a particular topic, which is the calculation of bid cost recovery payments that are made when batteries are deemed to have incurred certain types of losses in the real-time markets. We'll talk about some of their financial implications in terms of potential inflation of bid cost recovery and also larger market efficiency implications. So to summarize our conclusions, we definitely agree with the ISO and the Department of Market Monitoring that there are important incentive problems that can result in both significant financial transfers that we believe that are unearned in the form of excessive bid cost recovery, and very importantly, market inefficiencies in terms of insulation from incentives that real-time prices are supposed to provide for efficient management of state of charge, and the risk of premature state of charge discharge, and perhaps even resulting reliability problems. So we believe that there are several bidding strategies that can significantly inflate bid cost recovery payments with little risk to the storage resource engaging that behavior. And so I'm going to talk about two goals of the reform. And the first goal should be to eliminate what might be called bid cost recovery and phantom losses that result from including resource charging bids and discharge offers in the bid cost recovery calculation. We believe that this goal is likely to be partially, but not completely accomplished by implementation of the ISO's proposal. There are other proposals that might work better in some circumstances, but not as well in others, as the especially Section 5 of the opinion goes into. But first, let me define what we mean by phantom losses. Before I define phantom losses, I need to define deemed profit for bid cost recovery purposes. And this is actual real-time energy revenues or incremental revenues from real-time incremental energy minus real-time offer or bid costs that are assumed for the bid cost recovery calculation purposes. And these could be calculated in various ways, minus actual variable operations, maintenance costs, degradation costs, and potentially adjustment for changes in the end-of-day state of charge. If you have more energy in the tank at the end of the day than occurs in the day-ahead market, this energy is worth something and should be accounted for and may be significant. Phantom losses are the contributions of assumed real-time offers and bids, that portion of deemed profit, to that loss, or strictly speaking, the portion of those offers and bids that are opportunity cost based. Those offer and bid costs are not actually contributing to cash flows at the end of the day, and they could definitely differ from actual revenue changes and could exaggerate bid cost recovery. Okay, so this first goal of minimizing phantom losses and their contribution to inflating bid cost recovery would be addressed by the ISO's proposal by adjusting the assumed bid costs or offer costs based on all 24 hours. And we think that would be partially effective. And other possible proposals could also be effective, more effective in some circumstances, less effective in others. We are, however, unsure at this point whether the overall bid cost recovery and phantom losses is large enough. And we're also unsure as to whether the current ISO proposal would reduce it enough to justify the expense of implementing the ISO design in the software. Now, if bid cost recovery payments on phantom losses could be material high and the cost of implementing the ISO proposal low enough, then we would support implementation of the ISO proposal despite its limitations, basically to plug that hole in the dike, because we do think that it is a potential risk, but we don't know what the cost has been so far. Now, why are we unsure as to what the costs in terms of how big this first problem is? We haven't seen data on how much BCR would be eliminated by the ISO proposal, nor how much BCR in the past has been attributable to phantom losses, as opposed to BCR that arises simply from the actual revenues part of the profit calculation, particularly buyback costs from premature depletion of state of charge or charging capability. That BCR may be justified in terms of being recovered, or might not be, but any rate, the phantom loss part of it, we're just not sure how large of it. As we interpret the calculations that DMM has made, and as we discuss those in section 5, those calculations suggest to us there, at least during the early summer of this last year, BCR payments on phantom losses seem to have been relatively small or not existent, but we're definitely unsure on all these points. Okay, that's the first goal, phantom losses leading to inflated BCR, the magnitude of which we're, in the past at least, we're unsure about, but we definitely see the potential for that, for strategic behavior that could inflate that, and we think that that's a hole that should be plugged. Now, there's a second goal, which is to address the following problem. The current BCR mechanism reduces the incentive of storage operators to use their bids and offers to manage state of charge over the day so that the resource can cover its day-ahead market schedules. In particular, there may be a heads I win and tails you lose situation in which there's an incentive that if you see high prices earlier in the day, let's take the money and run, because if it turns out that there are high prices later in the day and we have to recharge the resource based on those high prices, BCR will cover those losses. So we might win with the high prices earlier in the day, and the risk of losses is mitigated because we're protected to some extent from later high prices. And this could bias resources to discharging earlier in real time than really would be optimal based on what real-time prices would be anticipated in the market. And of course, this is arising in part because the real-time market has a limited time horizon on the order of an hour that it can see prices ahead of time. So we think a second long-term goal should be ensure that any BCR system doesn't interfere with incentives to manage storage in response to real-time price signals and over the day, so that the discharge of energy is most likely to occur when energy is most needed by the system. This second problem isn't addressed by the ISO proposal, and so that needs to be addressed, we think, as soon as possible in a phase 2 of this process. Okay, so in this phase 2, we think that further changes in BCR are therefore needed based on a more complete empirical analysis of the actual drivers of BCR payments in the past and the potential for the future. And we think that the problem needs to be fixed before building in more or increasing the amount of bidding flexibility that storage operators will have. So we believe that a phase 2 process should begin almost immediately to deal with both of these problems. Okay, so what does the rest of the opinion do? It explains these problems in some detail. There are many numerical examples, for example, in section 2, to illustrate how the current system leads to potentially leads to phantom losses, or could lead to phantom losses in the future. And then in section 5, how 5 different proposals or variants of proposals to change BCR might affect these phantom losses and BCR. And we basically conclude that no one proposal takes care of everything that can be implemented in the near term, can take care of everything, but that we may as well go with the ISO proposal. That's less than a ringing endorsement, shall we say, of the particular proposal the ISO makes, but we don't see any particular advantages to the variants that we talk to. I should also mention that section 4 turns the focus from the interaction of the day-ahead and real-time markets and the California ISO Balancing Authority and the implications for BCR calculations to other balancing authorities in the larger Western energy market. And so we conclude that there's less potential for phantom losses, inflated BCR, elsewhere outside the ISO, it still would be desirable to make appropriate changes in BCR calculations to eliminate potential for phantom losses in the real-time market and inflated BCR payments. Any rate, that concludes my summary, and I'd like to now turn the mic over to Jim and Scott and see if there's anything that you would like to add to my summary at this point.
You want to go first, or should I?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, so go ahead, Scott.
Okay. There are 2 points I want to elaborate on a little bit. First, when in talking about the impact of phantom losses on BCR, we want to emphasize that Ben was talking about in the months of May through July, it appeared to be almost zero. But that, of course, is after this stakeholder process was started. And if you look at the DMM data, for February, March, and April, it's about looks to be eyeball estimates, somewhat more than 1 million, and maybe about 14% of all the BCR. So that isn't a trivial number. And we have an issue now that we've crossed the bridge. The CAISO has put out a lot of detail on these bidding strategies, which maybe not everybody was aware of back in February, March, April. So things could get worse if we don't do anything. So I think that that's an aspect of this which argues that, having gone this far, we can't focus just on the last few months in terms of their outcomes, but we have to look back a little further. And also the DMM analysis is a high-level analysis. While as far as we can see, it should capture the effect of phantom bidding. We do see specific instances the CAISO gives us where there's large amounts of, where it's almost all due to the inflated bids. So, 90 or 95% of the problem is due to the bids, not the revenue. So it all depends on maybe individual resources and outcomes and what was going on in months. So that's why it's hard for us to know how important change is. But going back to what was going on earlier this year before the stakeholder process started is a reason to say we ought to try to at least fix the problem of the very inflated and very low bids being used to create phantom BCR. The second issue that's been talked about is, should we apply this to all intervals of the day, or just to the intervals where the stated charge constraint might have been binding? And the thing is that when the CAISO was talking about its original proposal, which threw out all of the BCR in the interval in which the stated charge constraint was binding, then you didn't need to look back at the other hours of the day to see what was happening, because you threw out all of the BCR. The approach the CAISO has taken now is to just cap the bids that are used to calculate the BCR. So it is also relevant not only what the losses are in that hour, but what the profits that offset it were in other hours. And that requires looking back at all the hours. The other thing is that the CAISO original approach of looking at when the state of charge constraint was binding would identify when there was BCR, but no day-ahead market schedule. As we indicate several points in the opinion, the CAISO has given us unit-specific hour interval-by-interval data for 8 unit days. And in 4 of those unit days, there are hours in which there was no day-ahead market schedule, but there's large BCR. And it's hard for us to parse exactly the cause. As we say several times in the opinion, maybe in some situations, the BCR is due to regulation charging. Maybe it's due to the SS, the ancillary service stated charge flag not being set correctly in places. There are a lot of things that might trigger it, but in all cases, not having bids that are grossly out of line with market prices and with the actual opportunity costs will cap the bids. I mean, there are as I said, you've got situations where 85, 95% of the BCR is due to the inflated bids and not to the actual losses, which are small. So that's 2 things that I want to emphasize, that things have changed since the early spring. And we need to, in assessing the impact, we need to look back to what it was before this process started. And we also have to recognize that, things could be worse now if we don't do anything. And then that the CAISO's, thinking about whether it needs to apply to all intervals, we have to recognize that the current proposals are not the same as the original state of charge dependent proposal. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so at this point, Silas, you can invite folks on the phone line to queue up if they have comments or questions for us.
All right, if you've got a comment or a question, you can press the raise hand icon on WebEx. It'll be in your participants panel right at the bottom. All right, and we have one in the queue. Donald Trethaway, your line is unmuted. You can go ahead.
Hi, Ben. Don Trethaway from CISA. Thanks very much for an excellent opinion. It definitely reiterates how complex BCR can be to think about it. And I would note that it isn't just CAISO and DMM that are concerned about inflated and inappropriate BCR. I think we recognized from the very beginning that whether it's through inadvertently bidding to maintain your day ahead schedule, such as that we talked about, there were issues with auto bidders that bid negative 150 so that they would ensure that their day ahead discharge schedules would always clear. As well as any strategic bidding. So, we from the very beginning, we've taken this very seriously, that we need to come up with some approach to address either inadvertent or strategic bidding to inflate BCR. And I think, one thing in reading your opinion, in terms of applying the proposal in all intervals, and I'm glad you had access to additional 8 units. That was something we were looking forward to seeing how our proposal actually would work. But one of the key takeaways I took from it was it may not be as material a difference in terms of overall reduction in BCR that one might be concerned about. Is that interpretation correct?
Don, I think it's hard to say because we don't know what the universe is. We do see hours in which there's no day ahead market schedule and large, amounts of BCR, but we don't have, data compiled over a large period to make that assessment. That was one thing that's why we refrain from fiddling with possible improvements, because we don't know what an improvement is. But we think that the CAISO approach of at least capping the bids used to calculate the BCR at the DEB when they're selling back and putting a floor under it when they're buying back will reduce extreme BCR payments that are in excess of losses. And I agree with you, it can be inadvertent. I mean, that's why we have to change the rules. It isn't market participant behavior that's wrong, or at least not all the time. It's just the rules are wrong, and we got to fix the rules. But we don't know
agree with you more on that.
The nuances of exactly which situation is most important. We'd like to, but we don't.
No, that's why I agree. I think the energy storage enhancements is key. We've got to see if there's modeling improvements that we need to make, if there are ways that we can address the bid latency, the 75-minute bidding, improvements to the DEBs, and improvements to, really reconsidering whether, where make whole is appropriate, when a resource is held out of merit outside its control. So
right.
I think
we actually have to fix the BCR before we give anybody more bidding flexibility, because we don't just want to enable more phantom losses. So we get, this is a minimum to sort of put a tourniquet on, and then maybe we can do some more analysis, but maybe we're just going to have to take another direction, as was talked about, to basically base BCR on a completely different concept. And that's another reason why it's not worth spending a lot of time fussing around with variations on these rules, because that might not be the direction we'd want to go anyway.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Don. Silas, is there anybody else?
No, we don't have any other hands in the queue at this time.
Okay, yeah, I see the list and I can confirm that. Okay. That being the case, then I can consider a motion to adopt the opinion.
Move
Scott
to
or
adopt,
Jim?
unless Jim's faster than me.
Oh, no, looks like you beat me to it. I second.
Okay, Scott gets the honor of being mentioned first in the minutes, and Jim has seconded it. Let me ask if there are any modifications that anybody would like to make to the opinion.
Not from Scott.
Not that we know of.
Yeah, I see a typo at the end of the last sentence of section 1. So if you basically talk about phantom BCR, should talk about phantom losses. So I would fix that one typo. But other than that, I don't have any changes to suggest either.
Okay.
Okay. Then I'll ask for a vote on this. Scott,
I vote yes, and I agree with the editorial change, the cosmetic change you were gonna make.
and Jim.
Yes to both.
Okay, and I vote yes. So the opinion has been adopted. So the final will be posted, and we hope and we anticipate that we'll be having meetings in the near future on phase 2 of this process as we consider the other issues associated with bid cost recovery and try to look at the problem comprehensively as to when make whole is justified, as Don put it, and how that would be best implemented so we get the incentives that we want to see for efficient operation and avoiding an inadvertently or intentionally inflated BCR. Okay, if let's see, any other business, Scott or Jim,
Not from Scott.
Nope,
Or-
not from Jim.
or from ISO staff? Okay, so we'll see some of you at the meeting next Friday of the boards, and until then, I wish everybody a good weekend. And Silas, at this point, we can disconnect.
Okay, thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you all in the audience for joining us today. With that, our call is concluded, and you may now disconnect.